Shalom, and welcome to this special Talking Memory program marking International Holocaust Remembrance Day. My name is Meidin Shachar, and I am an educator and guide at the Ghetto Fighters House and will be your host for today's program. I want to welcome our global audience with a special welcome, as always, to the survivors and their families that are with us today. I want to thank everyone for their support and interest in our programs. This program is in participation with Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung Israel, Remember the Women Institute, and the Holocaust Center of Wagner College. Tomorrow marks the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, the German Nazi concentration and death camp where more than 1.1 million people were murdered between 1940 and 1945, with about 85% of those killed Jews. And what happened to the perpetrators? Most of the SS guards and camp employees were never brought to justice. Let's jump forward 80 years. UN Rights Chief Volker Turk has recently stated that the upcoming anniversary is a wake-up call to the dangers of dehumanization and apathy, and that, quote, anti-Semitism is rampant on our streets and online. Jews face increasing intimidation, threats, and physical violence, end of quote. Today's program, The Legacy of Leadership, will be dealing with this subject, looking at the heroines during the Holocaust and the essential work being done today at a global level to combat anti-Semitism. And now, I would like to invite Yigal Cohen, the CEO of the Ghetto Fighters House, to give the opening remarks. Yigal, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Medine. Hello, everyone. On the eve of International Holocaust Remembrance Day 2025, marking 80 years since the liberation of Auschwitz, we have chosen to focus on the theme of leadership. At the first Holocaust Commemoration Assembly, held in April 1949, more than 75 years ago, here at the Ghetto Fighters House Museum, one of the founders, Yitzhak Antek Zuckerman, a leader of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, stated, "We came here from broken walls with the desire to build sturdy homes and lives. Amid stormy days, and just before International Holocaust Remembrance Day, I wish to highlight the leadership of the Holocaust survivors." Zuckerman, along with his fellow survivors, came from the greatest destruction, the Holocaust, where entire Jewish communities were destroyed. Millions of Jews were murdered, and millions more lost their property, homes, and families. These survivors went through hell numerous times during the Holocaust. They arrived in the nascent state of Israel, bereft of everything. With their own hands, they rebuilt their lives, established a flower-rising settlement, integrated, led in building the society and economy of Israel, and most importantly, built an exemplary society that was then seen as a symbol and the model for many countries around the world, a phoenix rising in glory. The great strength of these survivors was for them a pillar of fire. It was their leadership that, after the greatest catastrophe, took the Jewish people and led them safely, humbly, and bravely to the shores of security, to the establishment of the State of Israel against all odds. Today, we will discuss the leadership of the Holocaust survivors, learn from it, and no less importantly, how it impacts our lives today. In a world full of turmoil, anti-Semitism, and racism, there is a place and a role for the inspiration that can be drawn from these survivors, each and every one to be treasured. This, as I see, is the important task before us. Every young man and woman who comes through our doors has the potential to be a leader, who can build the world, but also has the power to destroy it. Let us strive for the good together. I would like to thank today's speakers, Professor Lori R. Weintrob, the Honorable Petra Bayr, Reserve Lieutenant Colonel Avital Leibovich, and our partners, Remember the Women Institute and the Holocaust Center of Wagner College. Many thanks to our partners from the Friedrich-Ebert Foundation, Dr. Raf Meltzer, the Director, and Mrs. Judith Stelmach, Project Manager, for your long-standing friendship, especially during these days. I would also like to thank Meidin Shachar for organizing this special event. I wish us an inspiring and engaging event and hope for better, peaceful days soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Yigal, for your words. And now I would like to invite Judith Stelmach, who will speak on behalf of the Friedrich-Ebert Foundation in Israel. And I just want to send a personal letter out to Judith. Thank you. Thank you so much for helping me to organize this program. It takes a village, but sometimes it takes the leaders of the village more than anyone else. So thank you for that. And the floor is yours.
Thank you much, Meidin. And thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. So good evening. Tonight, in the midst of one of the most challenging periods in the history of the State of Israel, we are commemorating International Holocaust Remembrance Day 2025 and the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, as Yigal has already mentioned. During the past week, we have witnessed another type of liberation, the liberation from Hamas captivity of 7 brave Israeli women who have finally returned home to their families and loved ones after 15 months of being held hostages in Gaza. We are all united in our hope and wish for the return of the remaining 90 hostages and the end of this terrible war that has brought so much death, destruction, and sorrow upon Israel, Gaza, and Lebanon. Unfortunately, it seems that the world has learned very little from the horrible events of World War II and the Holocaust. Time and time again, we experience violent conflicts and wars, not only in the Middle East, but also in almost every corner of the globe. And in the 15 months since the horrific Hamas attack on the south of Israel on October 7th, 2023, and the subsequent war, we have also witnessed an unprecedented rise of anti-Semitism around the world. Dealing with these developments and challenges and rebuilding what was destroyed, not only in terms of lives and material, but with regard to moral values, requires courage, determination, and wisdom, or in short, leadership. This is the reason why we have decided to dedicate this special talking memory event to the legacy of leadership, to look back to the leadership of Tzivia Lubetkin and other women of courage during and immediately after the Holocaust, and to learn about the kind of leadership that is needed in order to counter anti-Semitism in Austria and the United States. I want to thank our distinguished speakers, Lori Weintrob, Petra Bayr, and Avital Leibovich for agreeing to share their views and expertise with us tonight. And as always, my special thanks and appreciation for our excellent cooperation go to my dear colleagues at the Ghetto Fighters House Museum, Yigal Cohen, and Meidin Shachar, Hannah Yablonka, Hava Cohen, Mali Eisenberg, and the whole team. Last but not least, many thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. I wish us all an inspiring evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. Thank you very much for your words. Thank you both also for reminding us about the context in which we're having this program today. I think it's very important. And I'm going to start with our first speaker. I would like to introduce our first speaker. Lori Weintrob is professor of history and founding director of the Holocaust Center at Wagner College that is located in New York City. She is co-editor of Heroines of the Holocaust, Reframing Courage and Resistance and Genocide, and Beyond Bystanders, Educational Leadership for a Human Culture. She is currently writing Eyewitnesses to History, Documents of the Holocaust. Professor Weintrob is committed to interfaith community building. She received her BA from Princeton University and her MA and PhD from the University of California in Los Angeles. And I want to personally thank you, Lori. We still haven't met face to face, but we've been in touch for a while, and I'm just so honored to have you here with us today to share your knowledge. So the floor is yours.
I want to express my gratitude to Kibbutz Lochamei HaGetaot for inviting us here to discuss the legacy of women leaders who stood against anti-Semitism as a call to action. The Ghetto Fighters House is an important site for research, but both for my own and other scholars. Thank you, Medine, for your kind introduction, and to Yigal and Judith, and to my co-panelists. I also want to welcome any Holocaust survivors and their families, and all of you. In my presentation today, I will argue that Zivia Lubetkin's leadership in wartime was essential to the armed resistance against Nazism and to the fight for human dignity. She was directly involved in military operations in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, yet equally, she placed mutual aid at the center of her actions. Like Rachel Auerbacher, an Oneg Shabbat writer who ran a soup kitchen, Lubetkin documented heroism in daily life in the ghetto and embodied it. In her testimony of 1946, later published as In the Days of Destruction and Revolt by Kibbutz Lochamei HaGetaot, of which she was one of the founders, Lubetkin constructed an astonishing portrait of widespread female activism. Her testimony offers a record of transformative leadership skills, including strategic planning, negotiation, critical reflection, and sustaining a common purpose that remains relevant. I argue that we must do more to highlight women's leadership and strategic decision-making, particularly in rescue and resistance, in our commemorations of the Shoah, in history and Holocaust museums, in Holocaust and human rights education, in order to deepen our understanding of both how the Holocaust happened and how hate escalates. Significantly, women played essential roles operating educational, cultural, and humanitarian initiatives during the Holocaust and World War II, thereby preserving social customs and religious traditions in defiance of oppression and often saving lives. The anti-fascist artist Friedel Brandeis inspired hundreds of young women in the Terezin ghetto. How many thousands more Jewish women as nurses and doctors, lawyers, journalists, and educators, mothers and daughters, like Hadassah Rosensaft, made courageous and compassionate decisions which have yet to be integrated into the full narrative of the Shoah. After her capture and torture by the Gestapo in France, on the eve of her 22nd birthday, Marianne Cohn, who had helped smuggle 300 Jewish children across the border to safety in Switzerland, wrote these poetic lines, "You do not know the extent of my courage." We are here today because too many do not know the extent of the courage of women in the Holocaust, World War II, and other genocides, despite 5 decades of excellent writing on this topic by esteemed scholars such as Vera Laska, Judy Teider-Baumel-Schwartz, Dalia Ofer, Lenore Weitzman, Rochelle Seidel, and many others. Sarah Ganaitsa in Lithuania taught herself to shoot, and Sarah Yehoshuda Fortis in Greece trained an army of 13 young women like herself. Be strong and have courage, chazak va'amatz, are the final words of Rosa Rabata, one of the key leaders of the 1944 uprising in Auschwitz-Birkenau. Rosa organized and managed the collection of gunpowder by 20 young women and its transfer to the underground fighters who created explosives. Against the inhumanity and oppression of the largest Nazi death camp, this defiant community and the leaders who understood the power of solidarity still flourished. Often overlooked, over 3,000 women played critical roles in uprising against the Nazis in ghettos, forests, forced labor, and concentration camps, including Auschwitz. As in other historic instances of guerrilla warfare, women played a vital role in surveillance operations, collecting funds, forging documents. While we admire those who challenged Nazi ideology with pistol or pen, many find it difficult to name these individuals who stood up. Why can we name the perpetrators, Goering, Goebbels, Eichmann, and not the resistors? An analysis of the Holocaust must take into account not only the timing of the final solution, but the actions of rescue and resistance, notably by women. Zivia Lubetkin was barely 25 years old when World War II began, yet she had already demonstrated strategic thinking. Born in 1914, she was one of 7 children of Yaakov and Chaya. She became a counselor in the secular left-wing Zionist youth group Freiheit or Freedom in her hometown of Byton, Poland. She then moved to Warsaw to accept a position as director of training farms in the head office of Hehalutz, the Pioneer, which required her to travel throughout Poland, gaining her further admiration and organizational experience. A delegate of the Eretz Israel labor bloc, she was immersed in debates on international policy at the 21st Zionist Congress. Immediately after the war's outbreak, Lubetkin refused an immigration certificate to Palestine, where her brother and sister had made Aliyah, and decided instead to remain with her young pupils to share their fate. Frumka Plotnica requested that Zivia rejoin her in Warsaw as part of the Dror Underground as a strong advocate to counter the oppressiveness in the general government. The contrast of the solidarity of Jewish youth and the aggression of the German soldiers was jarring to her. On seeing the white armband with the blue Star of David for the first time, Lubetkin froze, then reflected, quote, "These Jews may have already gotten used to wearing that armband that symbolizes their inferiority. Perhaps, I thought again, they wear it defiantly in secret contempt of their persecutors." Lubetkin questioned this dehumanizing symbol required by decree of Hans Frank after November of 1939. She expressed empathy for the wider Jewish community when witnessing harrowing examples of Nazi brutality. To shield the youth that she was devoted to from hunger, disease, and other horrors, Lubetkin fundraised for emergency social welfare and educational programs such as the Dror High School, while also searching for escape routes to Palestine. She negotiated with Polish employers to obtain seasonal agricultural work for Jewish youth and ensured their survival even after the establishment of the ghetto. Hannah Gelber detailed Lubetkin's dedication, quote, "Zivia was at the center of the doers and the doings, in the corridors of the American Joint Distribution Committee, exhaustively dealing with obtaining aid for comrades, transit permits, exemption permits from labor camps, fighting for our principles. As treasurer for Dror Hehalutz, she was, quote, the address for all secret correspondence with foreign countries, which historian Naima Barzel judged a role akin to Secretary of State. Her peers admired her transformational leadership skills. In the words of partisan Shalom Cholaski, the emotional ability to unite such a group in such a short time was one of the wonders of those days, and it was thanks mainly to Zivia's talents to create an ideological experience full of warmth, comradeship, and brotherhood as a shelter in times of attack and disaster. Chavka Rabban Folman, a courier, identified Lubetkin as more impactful than her own mother. The decision to shift from nonviolent to armed resistance involved critical reflection on the escalation of Nazi brutality after the invasion of the Soviet Union. As the news of the mass killings at Ponary and Chelmno reached Warsaw, Lubetkin reflected, stepped back, and made a decision. Quote, "We knew very well that our greatest enemy was false hope, the great illusion, which we would have to destroy through our movement, newspaper, and personal contacts. We would have to tell the people the truth." Alongside Mordechai Anielewicz, Shmuel Breslau, and Adolf Berman, Lubetkin represented Dror on the executive committee of the anti-fascist bloc, the first lived short effort to create unified, diverse underground movement to better acquire arms in April of 1942. Within a week of the Great Deportation, on July 28, 1942, representatives of Hashomer HaTzair, Dror Hehalutz, and Akiba youth movements established the ZOB, or Jewish Fighting Organization. The task of organizing the uprising in the ghetto was assigned to Lubetkin alongside Anielewicz, Yitzhak Zuckerman, her future husband, Miriam Heinsdorf, and Israel Canel. For the movement, it was a new turning point, Lubetkin recalled. All our cultural activity was now subverted to military training. They printed wall posters and manifestos, encouraged hiding, and sent liaisons to the Aryan side to obtain weapons. Lubetkin explains, "We would run like madmen from meeting to meeting." Zivia oversaw many of the missions of the women liaisons, or kashariot, circulating newspapers, funds, and later weapons. The role of these Jewish undercover agents was vital for breaking the isolation that the Germans enforced on the ghetto and the strict prohibitions of any contact between them. A decree in October 1941 warned that Jews who left the ghetto or Poles who aided them would be executed. At 26 years old, Lanka Kozybrodska spoke Polish, Yiddish, and Hebrew, had studied French and German at the university, and learned English, Russian, and Ukrainian. These women had skills. Lubetkin further evoked her ingenuity. Quote, "There was no destination she could not reach. I remember packing her suitcase, hiding the dangerous material in a false compartment, thinking to myself anxiously, who knows what may happen to her. On one trip, the Germans indeed searched everyone's suitcase. Lanka didn't panic and instead appealed to the gallantry of a German to carry her heavy suitcase past a line of German guards without the slightest suspicion of what he was carrying." Lubetkin elevated these valiant women from the diverse youth movements as vital to the resistance to Nazi decrees. Historian Sharon Geva has proposed that Kashariot be called spearheads, the principal high readiness component of military forces. In that light, Lubetkin's role appears comparable to British intelligence agent Vera Rosenberg Atkins, principal assistant to Special Operating Executive Director. At age 33, Atkins was in charge of 480 undercover agents, of whom 39 were women in France. When the Nazis began a new wave of deportation of the remaining 50,000 Jews from Warsaw on January 18, 1943, women fought alongside men in this operation, armed with a few grenades and pistols, and Lubetkin emphasized our own original weapon, light bulbs filled with sulfuric acid. After the German troops withdrew, the Polish resistance movement was more willing to negotiate with the Jewish rebels, although their aid was still limited. Mordechai Tenenbaum noted in his diary Lubetkin's central role in February of 1943, quote, "Zivia, the mother of the movement, bearing the burden of suffering each and every day. Who in Warsaw was not familiar with the name Zivia? Zivia, who will make 1,001 attempts at getting things organized according to her wishes, works harder than any of us, satisfaction less than all of us." Lubetkin's empathy encompassed the larger Jewish community. At the same time, we didn't scoff at the notion of passive resistance, she testified. Anyone who hid made the Germans work more difficult. They could no longer round up people on the streets so easily as they had done before. This emphasis on hiding, a blueprint for guerrilla warfare, proved to be decisive. 75 years later, historian Javi Dreyfus has proven that this tactic indeed mobilized thousands and contributed to the longevity of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. When the Nazi commander Jürgen Stroop entered the ghetto on April 19th with 2,000 troops on the eve of Adolf Hitler's 54th birthday, Lubetkin was directly involved in military operations. At the height of the battle in late April, the Central Command, the Kommenda, notably including Lubetkin, directed the battle in the central ghetto. For example, Avital Leibovich often relied on Lubetkin's help to ease tensions with ardent Dror activists in his area. Capturing the ferocity of ZOB battle tactics, Lubetkin testified. One of the women in the unit, Zipporah Lehrer, leaned out the window and hurled bottles of acid onto the Germans below. The Germans were so shocked to see a woman fighting, they shouted, "Eine Frau kämpft," a woman is fighting. During another confrontation, Lubetkin reported, Zipporah Lehrer opened a retreat by throwing hand grenades at the Germans. Previously, a teacher in the orphanage of Janis Korczak and Stefa Wilkenska, then paired with Kazak Rotem in battle, the 23-year-old Lehrer was tragically killed on May 3, 1943. In recalling Zipporah Lehrer's name and humanity, Lubetkin fulfilled a duty to bear witness, a vital part of community building leadership. By a twist of fate, or perhaps because of her community building role, Lubetkin was neither captured nor killed. The day before the ZOB command at Mila 18 was tragically discovered by the Germans, it had been decided that Lubetkin should be sent out in order to find a connection to the Aryan side. Thus, on May 10th, Lubetkin held her gun while crawling through the sewers for 20 hours, alongside Marek Edelman and others. It was grueling both physically and mentally. In the end, she wrote, with a heavy and tortured heart, we all descended into the sewer canal. I now felt the full meaning of the plunge. You crawl through the sewer canal utterly exhausted. Lubetkin then reported on the ideological vision, her Zionist dream that gave her strength of mind. Quote, "Your entire being is centered on the reckoning of your life and of the movement which has given that life meaning and purpose. You envisage the shadow of a distant dream you shared with your comrades, a dream of a far-off land, of Eretz Yisrael, of its life of friendship and work, human dignity and pride." Note her powerful connection to others, those who she longs to see and those who she can't bear to have left behind, and to Israel. The mutuality and empathy within her circles were an invaluable shield against Nazi inhumanity. At the cemetery at Lochamei HaGetaot, Lubetkin's gravestone bears only one word, Zivia. This legacy is a permanent moving testament to her wartime role as an address for all of the Jewish underground and to her post-war commitment to Israel and to preserving the memory of the Shoah. As I stood in the cemetery in the summer of 2017, I reaffirmed my commitment to place the achievements of Zivia Lubetkin and her leadership philosophy at the center of my teaching and scholarship. After returning to New York, inspired by my visit to Lochamei HaGetaot, I co-organized 3 seminars with Professor Laura Morwitz on heroines of the Holocaust, with scholars from 8 countries and the support of the Wagner College Advisory Board, co-chaired by Dr. Victor and Kim Avis and Fern Zagor. The book, Heroines of the Holocaust, highlights the history of women of courage, which we felt is greatly needed to advance our understanding of how shared values and networks of mutual aid strengthen participants' abilities to resist in the broadest sense of the term, including in their daily life, an inspiration for women and men in our own time. A unique feature of the book is that among its 21 contributors are sons of 3 resistance fighters. Menachem Rosensaft, son of Hadassah Rosensaft, Dr. Hadassah Rosensaft, Avihu Ronen, son of Chaya Klinger, and Dr. Benjamin Mead, son of Vladka Mead. There are so many books now touching on these topics and films for all of you to explore. But I want to go back to my original impulse to do this work. Women survivors who I interviewed on Staten Island, New York, including Auschwitz survivors Rachel Roth and Shirley Gottesman from Poland and Czechoslovakia, helps me to see how even at a young age, they created relationships of solidarity that enhanced their courage and enabled themselves to survive and to mobilize others to survive. These ordinary women behaved with extraordinary courage in Majdanek and Auschwitz. On this 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, I am very proud to have introduced them and other survivors to over 25,000 youth in the tri-state area over the past decade. Further, some of my students memorized their testimony and the testimony of Zivia Lubetkin and other heroines of the Holocaust. And we built a permanent exhibit which highlights women rescuers and resistors, seen behind me, as an interfaith center and part of the work of the Staten Island Hate Crimes Task Force, and as a model for others. In conclusion, as the final solution escalated, Lubetkin helped to mobilize thousands, 50,000 men, women, and children throughout the Warsaw Ghetto to defy Nazi policy. She was one of the most important opponents of the Nazi regime. Right after the war ended, she recorded the bravery of young women like Zipporah Lara, who was both an early childhood educator and a ghetto fighter. Lubetkin's testimony to the spectrum of educational, cultural, and armed resistance by women and men allows us insights into how Jews face the horrors of the Holocaust. These lessons in the human spirit are inspiring in our own times, expand our leadership skills in our own fragile democracies, and enlarge our definitions of the terms hero and heroine. Changing the perception of women from helpless victims to persons of courage amplifies the dignity of those under attack in times of persecution, war, and genocide, as well as our own responsibilities to take action. We too must be educators and warriors. We must write the history of women activists, and we must be community builders to embody it. Like Zivia and the women of courage in the Shoah and World War II, we must lean into our skills and be fighters through education and action. We must demand of our museums and Holocaust and government organizations to highlight the leadership skills of women in the past to help women today make an impact in the fight against anti-Semitism and hate in all its forms. I recommend that Lubeckin's testimony should be republished with commentary, and that further the excellent scholarship by Israeli scholars needs to be more supported, translated, and shared in public spaces. We must open up avenues of interfaith inquiry that are critical in the face of rising anti-Semitism, authoritarian movements, and wars that threaten democracy and mutual respect. The courage of these women in the Shoah and their love of Israel must inspire us to a sense of urgency to take action immediately with an ethos of freedom, justice, and equality, the human rights they fought for and too often died for. Never forget. Thank you. Toda rabah.
Thank you, Lori, for your words. I really don't have much to add. I think you said everything perfectly. And it's exactly why we're here today, talking about the legacy of leadership and what it means today. And of course, remembering these incredible, incredible women. I know that you have been doing this for such a long time, and I can hardly wait to finally get to Wagner College and see the work that you're doing there. It'll happen at some point. But your message is very clear, and we're going through very difficult times, both in Europe and in the United States and in Israel, as far as women's rights and protecting them, and also having women's voices heard and listened to and appreciated and understood. So thank you so much for your work and for your message. I'd like to move on to our second speaker. Petra Bayr is a member of the Austrian National Council and spokesperson for Foreign Affairs and Global Development Policy for the Social Democratic Group in the Austrian Parliament. She is currently chairperson of the Committee on the Election of Judges to the European Court of Human Rights at the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe and president of the Women Working Group of the Socialists, Democrats, and Green Group at the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, PACE. Furthermore, she is deputy chair of Austria's Social Democratic Women's Organization in Vienna. She is a member of the Committee of Strategy, Investment, and Policy of the International Planned Parenthood Federation, and board member and treasurer of Parliamentarians for Global Action, PGA. As well, she is the president of the Vienna Academy of Education. She has been involved in the Austrian Israeli Society for many years, focusing on work against anti-Semitism. Before I give Petra the floor, I just want to say that, first of all, it's an honor to have you here with us today, but Ms. Bayr will have to leave, and she won't be able to stay until the end of the program. So if you have any questions specifically for her, we will take those questions directly after her talk. And now, Petra, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very good evening from Strasbourg, where the winter session of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe is going to start tomorrow morning, and we are in preparation and pre-meetings. So that's the reason why I'm in a restaurant at the moment. I hope you can hear me well. And it's also a very big honor for me to be with you tonight. I think it's really an important issue we are dealing with. So let me start with the report I wrote for the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe on combating anti-Semitism and foster Jewish life. It was voted and finalized in June 2022 in the light of the corona deniers, the anti-vaxxers, and it does not reflect any new dynamics all over the world following the pogrom of October 7th in 2023. The main findings and recommendations of this 2022 report will not surprise you, and it's many things are similar to what Lori said at the very end. It states that anti-Semitism is built on harmful stereotypes, which make the Jewish community a scapegoat for emerging crises. far from being relegated to a threat from the past, anti-Semitic violence and hate speech, including online, are a daily reality across Europe today. COVID-19 brought a rise in conspiracy myths accusing Jewish communities of creating and spreading the virus, for instance. And whenever there are any conflicts in the Middle East, anti-Semitism rises all over the world. We know that. And it was and is the same for the time after the pogrom of October 7th and the war taking place afterwards. So tackling anti-Semitism, my report states, is of concern for all of us. Anti-Semitism is in contradiction with the fundamental values on which the Council of Europe was founded and should be addressed in a human rights framework. Resolute action must be taken both to prevent and to combat anti-Semitism and to foster Jewish life all over the continent. The adoption of action plans and strategies to prevent and combat anti-Semitism with sufficient funding for their implementation, the criminalization of the denial or trivialization or condemnation of the Holocaust, where it is not yet the case, investing in Holocaust remembrance, including at schools, developing exchange programs, making the fight against online hate speech a priority, and taking measures to foster Jewish life in Europe are essential components of the fight against anti-Semitism, which should be implemented without any delay. As it is quite a pressing issue at the moment, let me now focus on the elections to the Austrian Assembly in September 2024, where the FPÖ, the so-called Freedom Party of Austria, which is a rights extremist party, became the strongest with 29%. After the elections, all parties, all the other four parties also elected to parliament, declared that they will not form a government with FPÖ due to their extremist thinking and language. Unfortunately, government negotiations between People's Party, Social Democrats and Liberals failed because there was no consensus on how to deal with the tremendous budget deficit. So in early January, after the Conservatives and the Liberals declared the negotiations to be failed, the President of the Republic of Austria asked the Freedom Party to build a government with a partner. And now there are negotiations about a coalition treaty with the People's Party, which is from EPP group, ongoing, which it would not be the first time that we have a coalition between conservatives and far right wings. It would be the third time already on the national level, and we also have it in many Bundesländer. And in reality, this is reality now, and we see that in many Bundesländer they make really xenophobic and racist realpolitik. But it is the very first time that the Freedom Party is in the lead, and that the federal chancellor will very likely be a right extremist. Speaker is his name. What we hear from the negotiations is, for instance, that they would like to stop the implementation of any decisions taken by international courts, like, for instance, the European Court of Human Rights. Free media comes under pressure because, for instance, free media that was critical about the Freedom Party in the past is expelled from press conferences. They're not allowed to enter the room at all. The Freedom Party is very close to Putin. They have a friendship agreement with his party. They say that they quitted it, but they never proved that they really ended it. And they are not only visiting Putin, but also Taliban and other extremists. We assume that they will finish their negotiations by mid-February. And it fits well into our debate tonight that earlier this week, just on Friday, the latest report on far-right extremism was published by the Austrian government that is still in power. it might be the last report for some years, as the Freedom Party is mentioned 231 times in this report and plays a central role in the consultation of the far right in Austria. In case there is no finalization of the coalition treaty between FPÖ and ÖVP, which is of course also still possible. They also have some debates. But if they do not agree on a coalition, then we will have new elections. And if you think now, okay, that could be a way forward and that could be a way out of the situation, no, it is not. The figures of opinion surveys published show an extreme rise of Freedom Party after the election day, from, I mentioned that, 29% in September 2024 to now 37% of mid-January 2025. And there's no other party than the ÖVP, the People's Party, is willing to make a coalition with them. It would, at the end, even if we have new elections, it would be the same, more of the same, but with a much stronger extreme right party in parliament, and nearly no way anymore to build a government against them. Key findings of the Austrian far-right extremism report that covers the years from 2020 to 2022 also include the Corona period. I already mentioned that, which was a time where the far-right in Austria was in an alliance with all these who neglected the virus and were in opposition to all public health measures to curb the virus. In an interview in September 2024, Herbert Kickl, the head of the Freedom Party and possible next chancellor, said that there is no right extremism in Austria. Of course, he is wrong, and also the report shows a totally different evidence. Since the year 2000, which was the last report by this of this kind, because in 2000, when we had the first coalition between conservatives and far right, they decided not to have any far right extremism reports anymore. So it was the first report again since 2000. And in 2000, we had a few hundred right extremist acts. In 2023 alone, we saw 1,208 right-wing extremist acts. The majority were violations of the Prohibition Act, the damage of property and incitement to hatred. The majority of the acts were committed by autochthone Austrians, while there were 97 left-wing extremist acts at the same time period. The chapter of the report, the chapters of the report are dedicated to various players in the Austrian far-right extremist scene. These include neo-Nazis, German national associations, the new rights and post-migrant nationalists, but right-wing extremist journalism is also specifically addressed. There have been dynamic developments in the far-right media landscape, with the coronavirus being the dominant topic that has overshadowed traditional far-right narratives during the pandemic. The Freedom Party started more than 10 years ago to establish their own online TV station and reach many people with their narratives and their activities. Personal overlaps are also discussed in the report. FPÖ, for instance, embraces and protects right-wing extremism and representatives of these movements. There are hardly any differences between parts of their party program and the idea of the extreme right, like I just want to single out one, the identitarian movement in Austria. The identitarian movement is characterized as an extreme right-wing youth organization with manifest echoes in its theory, aesthetics, rhetoric, and style. It's for activism with accompanying press work along the line of NGOs. and intensive comparative professional use of social media, it aims to achieve a broad impact. Pickle, the chairperson of FPÖ, speaks about the Austrian identitarian movement as an NGO from the right. And meanwhile, he doesn't see any reason not to cooperate with them anymore. Among the FPÖ members in parliament, there are many with ties to the Russian political system and members of German nationalist fraternities, including the Speaker of the Austrian National Assembly. The Austrian society has emerged from the coronavirus crisis with a more right-wing extremism. The increasing militarization of the far-right scene is also very worrying, of course. We see that queerness and LGBTIQ movements are increasingly becoming victims of right-wing extremist narratives and attacks, as the climate protection movement as well. And we also see misogynist rhetoric and policies that foster traditional sex roles. The tendency towards a fundamental alienation from Austrian democracy can be observed, accompanied by the new right narratives that the window of opportunity for a non-violent change, of course, will close in the foreseeable future. According to the report, militancy cannot be ruled out. There is a cause of concern for, and the first signs of sympathizers of accelerationists in the far-right wing terrorism in Austria. This refers to a strategy that aims to set off a spiral of violence through terrorism in order to tear liberal democracy apart. I don't know, to be honest, what the future will bring us in Austria, which cannot be seen isolated from the rest of the world, and developments like in Hungary, Slovakia, Russia, Argentina, US, and many more, where right-wing populists are ruling, and human rights, democracy, and rule of law are under pressure, including free press and independent jurisdiction. And I will close with that, as anti-fascists, we will of course continue our work, and we will continue to convince people to vote for their hopes and not for their fears. We will collaborate with other movements that strive for a human rights-based society, a liberal democracy, equality and freedom. But indeed, we need a new language, new media, new visions to be successful. In a nutshell, we also need new leadership that stands strong against authoritarianism, antisemitism, and anti-rights forces. And we will join our forces. And so I'm really grateful that we have the chance to exchange and probably also learn from each other. Thank you very much, and sorry for this really very pessimistic outlook that I gave you from Austria.
Thank you very much, Petra. There are a few questions, by the way, so I want to go back to where they are. First of all, I mean, again, I don't know how much of an answer you can give, but someone is asking why today has Austrian society been leaning more to the far right than during Kreski's time. And it's not just about Islamophobia. So that's, a very general question, but what is your perspective from your experience in Parliament? And it's happening not just in Austria, it's also happening all over Europe, in Hungary and so on. So why do you see this pull to the far right?
There are many reasons, and I think it's not possible to cover them all, but let me start with the economic situation of people. That, of course, with inflation, it became harder and harder for people to really earn their living and to cover all the costs. There is increasing lack of work, paid work. The unemployment is on the rise. People are afraid. There are, in some regions, including, for instance, my district in Vienna, there is a lot of migration. And for instance, at the moment, every month, about 300 Syrian kids come because their parents are now settled in Austria, and now they are allowed to bring their family, which means that there is a huge pressure on the education system. We are lacking personnel, we are lacking classrooms, we are lacking funding for, they don't speak any German, of course. And people are afraid that their kids do not learn anything in school because it's so overwhelming that so many new ones from other cultural backgrounds are coming. Another issue, I think, is that it is always, for people, easy to get easy answers for complicated questions. And I think that the far right manages much better than we do, because these answers are not our answers, of course. It's not an answer to say, okay, on the one hand, we are lacking personnel in all the care work. We know we will need thousands of more people to take care about our elderly. And we don't have them in Austria, but we kick out all those who are migrating to Austria to do that work. We are kicking out all those who are weekly commuters, for instance, coming from Hungary or from Slovakia, Slovenia, wherever, to take care about our elderly. And we had it already with the last conservative far-right coalition that, for instance, they wanted to not to give them the same family support, the allowances for their kids as we have for Austrian kids, even if the kids that are living here cost the same, but they say no, but not our kids. Yeah, so that's not the answers we want to give. But very often I have the assumption that people think, okay, if you take something away from me, I can handle it as long as you take away more from the others. And this way, how to address or not to address solidarity, not to address a society that only can live in its whole, but it seems segregated and is very xenophobic and is growing xenophobic. This might be another layer of an answer, beside 100 others, which I did not mention yet.
Mm-hmm. I know, it's a very difficult question. It's sort of like a dynamic situation where you're always checking. I think what you said about the media, social media, and having a television station, these are things that we're seeing all over, including Israel. So I understand what you're saying, and I think also not just the situation of immigrants, but also the fact that people aren't checking facts anymore. And sometimes the far right really knows how to spread a rumor and nobody checks. But when the left tells the truth, it's called a conspiracy. So there's this dichotomy in how things are explained. Somebody also asked about education in Austria, but we're going to save that because unfortunately, Petra, I know you have to go, but also there is a lot of background noise. So it's become very difficult to hear your
oh, I'm sorry.
answers. I know, that's we can't change that. So I want to thank you again for your presentation, for giving us some information about what's happening. And I think, unfortunately, what I hear more than anything in what you're saying is that this is a worldwide phenomenon.
Yeah,
also,
and if I, for instance, if I see the social media oligarchs around Trump, and if I see how they are acting, saluting the Hitler coups, mask, and it's a new kind of normal that's really frightening. That's really frightening. And what we also saw, that when you said it's fake news. When the far right is acting with fake news, they're really simply denying what they did themselves. Yeah, and we say people, hey, listen, don't you remember? It was the far right government that limited all the budget for the health and education system. We said, no, that's not true. You are lying. And totally ignore facts. But of course, that is because they have their own media and they are in their own bubble and hear this kind of narrative, this kind of truth all the time. And that makes it really, really very hard to act against. But we will not give up, for sure.
No, we will not give up. And that's going to take me directly to our final speaker. So again, I want to say thank you, Petra, for sharing all this information. And thank you for the work you're doing. It's a never-ending task, unfortunately. And with that, I would like to move on to our final speaker, Lieutenant Colonel in Reserves Avital Leibovich. And I want to say thank you so much for being able to join us. I want to give a short introduction. She's the director of the American Jewish Community, the AJC, in Jerusalem. For over 30 years, she served in senior media and public relations positions, crisis management, and international relations policymaking roles. She served as the IDF spokesperson to international media and established the IDF's interactive media branch, making it the first military in the world to be actively present on social media, something that we're saying today during the war in Israel. Avital has been doing reserve duty in the IDF Northern Command, and since October 7th, she has served for over 100 days. And thank you, Avital, for that. In addition to her work at AJC, Avital taught a public diplomacy course at Reichman University. For her efforts strengthening relations between Israel and Albania, Lieutenant Colonel Reserve Leibovich received the Knighthood of Skanderberg Award in June of 2021. She is the first Israeli national upon which this honor has been bestowed. And before I give the floor to Avital, I just want to state that we have in our audience today Her Excellency of the Republic of Croatia to the State of Israel, Mrs. Vesela Emarjin Korak. So I just wanted to thank her for joining us for our program today. And Avital, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maydeen, and thank you, Yigal, for the opportunity. It's a great pleasure for me to speak to you today. I have to say it was a very long day here in Israel. I'll say this to all the friends who are from abroad, that we are moving from one very tense situation to another, and the situation unfolds quite quickly. So it's good for once to talk about issues which relate to legacy and leadership. It's a bit change of the day-to-day kind of situations we're facing. So I think you chosen such an inspiring topic, talking about leadership and inspiration, leadership and legacy. And I'll speak a little bit about the Jewish community, who was built in the US in the 1920s. Actually, before that, there was a group of German Jews who, following the pogroms in Kishinev in 1906, decided to do an act of leadership and build a group. They weren't sure exactly what would be the character of that organization. That's how AJC, the American Jewish Committee, was founded. The situation evolved. Jews came in masses in the 1920s to the US, immigrated. They came from Eastern Europe, they came from Germany, they came from other areas, and gradually their situation, as you know, on the ground strengthened from simple workers in factories. They became little owners of little shops and then factories, and then integrated well into the public life and the government sector. And I want to share with you a little bit today of, what is our focus. And of course, I'm open to questions. So our main focus is to strengthen Israel's place in the world. And in addition to that, we want to promote the Jewish people's interest around the world. Now, how do we do that? We actually are built in a very global architecture. And if we'll move to the next slide, you'll be able to see that we are all over the world, really. And this is something which is not necessarily usual for a Jewish organization. So we have 25 offices in the US, but we have 7 offices in Europe. Yes, we do not believe that Europe is gone or dead or any other synonym you wish to use. We strongly believe in Europe's ability to play a role, but we also have an office in Africa, we have an office in Brazil, we have an office in India, we have an office in Japan, and we recently launched an office in Abu Dhabi, understanding that we want to expand the Abraham Accords. We want Israel's place within the Arab world to be different. We want to contribute to the stability of the Middle East. By the way, right now we are in this time of opportunities, this window of opportunities in a region that things could still shape the future of this region. And by shaping the future of the region, we're actually impacting the entire world. It's not only staying here in the Middle East. So we are spread globally. So how do we really work? Basically, we are using the tool called diplomacy. And this is part of our legacy, and this is part of who we are. And this is today's curse. You mentioned it in the previous briefing. Petra mentioned it. And seems like the young generation lost the understanding of the word communication. And in diplomacy, this is key. So we conduct meetings face-to-face, yes, face-to-face meetings with heads of states and with foreign ministers and with ministers of defense and with presidents of countries and state secretaries of countries in order to convey our messages. And it was mentioned before that today's opinion many times is being made by a 30-second video that goes viral on TikTok, or an interview, an emotional interview that was heard somewhere. But there's a lot of ignorance and there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of fake news. And I'll show you a picture and you will never know if this picture was taken in Pakistan, in Syria, in Gaza, or in Sudan. And that's how people make their minds up about a topic, even a serious topic like a future of a country, or anti-Semitism, or Islamophobia for that sake. So we understand that we need to establish this face-to-face kind of relations, and that's what we do. Imagine that all of these offices, 15 global offices and 25 in the US, each of them work together with governments in their countries. So this adds up to thousands of meetings, also with diplomats. I'm glad to see Vesela joining the meeting, because definitely Vesela is one of the people I'm meeting, but also other ambassadors. And coming to Israel as an ambassador, if I could just open parentheses for a minute, it's not something which is relatively easy, especially if you've been posted in Europe before that, or in Asia before that, and then coming here, landing here, and then understanding the atmosphere, the culture of the Middle East, the challenges. It's quite challenging to be in this position, and we are trying to educate, to provide information, to brief. Can share with you, for example, that a few months ago, some ambassadors stationed in Israel called me up and said, Avital, we have no idea what's going on in the north, in the northern borders of Israel. What is the goal of Israel? What is the goal of the IDF? What are the challenges? What exactly are you doing? We need to provide a report to our foreign ministries, and we are not sure that we can give an accurate report. Can you help us? And of course, I was happy to brief. But it's more than that. Suppose you're a new ambassador and you landed in Israel, and you're supposed to begin your role as an ambassador or as a diplomatic representative. You're supposed to begin your role almost immediately. But how do you know exactly about the society in Israel, the demography, the strategic challenges, the political situation, and the political rules? Because obviously Israel is quite unique in that. So one of the things that we have developed 7 years ago is something that we call Israel 101. I can tell you that for a very small fee, from my perspective, a few hundreds of dollars per participant, we are able to create a seminar of 3 days for all the new incoming diplomats to Israel, ambassadors and others, and give them in 3 days all the basics they need to know about Israel. And we've done it for the last 7 years. And this year there were more than 90 participants, which was quite a big success. By the way, from every single country and every continent, there's always a representation. So this is just a taste of something that we do. Obviously, there are international organizations that we need to show presence. When I say presence, I mean convening meetings. Here in Israel, by the way, I'm invited to the Knesset to speak in committees about US-Israel relations or about anti-Semitism. This is something that I also see as an educational opportunity for the legislators, for our Knesset members, for our ministers to really understand and dig into the topic. So this is something that we do also here in Israel. I want to say maybe a few words about the domestic activity in America, because one of the issues is legislation, and we spoke about anti-Semitism before, and I'm a great believer that there are 3 main, I would say, pillars on the issue of anti-Semitism. Number 1 is education. There is no substitute for that, and I'll speak about that in a minute. Number 2, it's the issue of legislation. And number 3 is the enforcement. If you have only number 1 and 2, and there is no law enforcement, then 1 and 2 actually cannot be enough to reach that specific goal. So whenever there's an opportunity, we try to advocate and promote different kinds of legislation. For example, the No Hate Act is an act that passed a few years ago, and basically it provided additional funding to regional governors and mayors in order for them to utilize that money according to their needs of their region, whether it's a hotline that will be available 24/7. Let's say, God forbid, a Jew was now stoned somewhere, or an anti-Semite graffiti was sprayed on a wall of a school, of a Jewish school or synagogue. So this hotline would be a place where people could report 24/7, for example, or heightened security. Whenever I come to America, I have to say, I always have a twist in my stomach when I enter a synagogue through magnometers with the private security company guarding and a police car, a federal police car parking outside. I always have that twitch in my stomach, even though, here we are undergoing rocket attacks and so on. It's also in kindergartens. When I see kindergartens abroad, Jewish kindergartens, and they have the security around them and bulletproof walls protecting them, this is something that obviously additional funding can also support. In addition to that, there are caucuses, in the Congress, and caucuses are a good way to push forward different topics we want to promote. And I mentioned before the Abraham Accords. I have to say that the previous administration, the Biden administration, when it first started, I would say there was not a lot of enthusiasm to deal with the Abraham Accords for political reasons. It belonged to the administration before that, so the motivation was not high in the beginning. And therefore, we helped establish the Abraham Accords Caucus, which consisted of Republicans and Democrats. We're not a political organization, by the way. We don't promote a party here or a party there or a president or anything of that sort, and we don't take any government money. So when we helped establish the Abraham Accords Caucus, suddenly movement began. The caucus began traveling to the Middle East and then to Israel and had meetings and tried to promote issues. They heard from all parties. And again, this is something that brought the issue back to the table. And I know that you're all hearing the voices about expanding the Abraham Accords and moving maybe to Saudi and other countries. Indonesia was on the table. So this is something, of course, we are supporting. 2 years ago, we convened a meeting in the White House with the second gentleman, Kamala Harris's husband, Doug. And the idea was to have something which we call to action against anti-Semitism. And the idea was to invite different kinds of envoys, anti-Semitism envoys from all over the world to sit together until smoke went out of the White House. And this resulted in a booklet with 100 recommendations for the White House, issued by the White House, about fighting anti-Semitism. And I'm happy to say, I'm proud to say that at least half of those recommendations came from AJC. And of course, we are monitoring and making sure that this will still continue. And here are results which I want to share with you, a little bit of results from our survey about anti-Semitism. And we are having these surveys every year. You can find it, by the way, on our website, ajc.org. And these are quite alarming results because 93% of American Jews believe today that anti-Semitism is a problem in the US. This is a huge number. I can tell you from my own experience with colleagues who live in New York, which is, a state with a big majority of Jews, were at some point afraid to leave their apartments in Manhattan because there were violent protests near the subway and in central areas and in Times Square. They were actually huddled at home at certain times. And these are people in their 30s. 63% of American Jews feel the Jews in the US are less secure today than a year ago. And of course, we understand that following the war, October 7th, Israel is fighting in 7 fronts. This also had a direct implication on Jewish communities all over the world. And 46% of American Jews changed their behavior due to fear of anti-Semitism. What kind of behavior? Especially we see it in colleges. Young kids, 17 or 18-year-old, just prefer not saying they're Jewish, so God forbid they would not be attacked. Or other people are considering whether to participate in a public event because maybe, they would be at risk going to a public event, and so on and so forth. We see a lot of those signs, and these are definitely alarming signs. Let's go to the next slide, please. So one of the issues of anti-Semitism is the IRA working definition. We try to promote it. We, AJC, try to promote it not only in countries, within countries, but also within institutions, because we believe that there needs to be some sort of a definition, and everybody could follow that framework. But it's not enough, as I said, only the education. So let me tell you something that we have been working on quite recently. We have built a center, an education center, which actually doesn't only focus on campuses, on US campuses, but today, I'm sorry to say, that anti-Semitism even starts at high schools, even at private high schools. And a private high school in the US, there are more than 4,000 of private high schools, and the tuition is around $40,000 per person. So these are not areas of, hard labor or people who are immigrants and, cannot afford, bread. These are affluent areas. And these are the leaders of tomorrow in many cases. So we started working even there. And when I say working, I mean trainings. We created different kinds of glossaries for anti-Semitism as tools for those teachers and principals and deans to use. And we're doing something else. We're also bringing delegations to Israel of educators, of university presidents, of principals of high schools. We want to show them with their own eyes. We want them to experience and understand firsthand, because as you all know, it's one thing to read a story in a paper or watch a TV program. It's another thing to be here on the ground in Israel and actually feel and experience what we are facing here. And another thing that we've been doing is a campaign which involves mayors and governors against anti-Semitism. Basically, this is a countrywide campaign which will recruit a lot of mayors and governors all over the states, by the way, also in Europe. And basically, they sign some sort of declaration which they declare that they're against anti-Semitism, of course, and they will fight against it. Their state will fight against it, and this is something that we do every year. We also invite the mayors, by the way, to Israel. I mean, we have a delegation of mayors that comes every year from the US, and this is just another layer of this education kind of level. And then, yes, you can press the link, please, because I also want to talk about the minorities. And being Jewish in America, as you know, it's less than 2% of the total population. Usually minorities like to cooperate with other minorities. And this, of course, has a few goals. For example, to reduce friction and tensions, and also to find areas of common interest. So we established joint councils with Muslim communities, with other communities, with Indian communities, with Latino communities, with Hispanic communities, and we are working jointly on different issues. Anti-Semitism is one of them. We also have interreligious dialogue with other organizations. And basically, we are great believers in collaboration with like-minded organizations. I know that in some organizations, there's this organizational culture of being secluded, that God forbid someone will find out the secrets of the organizations. We are great believers in collaboration. Next slide, please. So this is not the only thing that we're doing in AJC. Anti-Semitism is a critical part of our work, but we are also dealing with the issue of the hour. So Iran, of course, is the nuclear aspirations of Iran, rather, is something that is of great concern to us. We believe that it is the Israeli interest, but of course the US's interest to have a nuclear-free Iran. We objected the JCPOA in 2015. And basically, we're trying to raise the topic in meetings that we have in international forums and others, conferences, petitions, a lot of media. We also have our own social media platforms. Hezbollah, you're all hearing what went on in the north maybe today, and those of you who missed it, Hezbollah organized over the weekend convoys of civilians, Shiite Lebanese who support Hezbollah, and sent them to really bother IDF soldiers who are on the ground, despite of the fact that Israel published on Friday warnings not to go to the villages in South Lebanon because the ceasefire is still not complete. The Lebanese army did not deploy. You know, we're noticing that everywhere in the region where a terror organization leads and controls the political system, the economic system of the country is a failure. And Lebanon is not different. I can tell you that just for your interest, $1 equals 89,300 Lebanese pounds. So the economic situation is dire. The unemployment situation is dire. The atmosphere in the country is very complicated. They don't have a lot of hours of electricity per day. And they have an opportunity now to get rid of Hezbollah, to weaken Hezbollah further to what Israel did. And maybe we'll see a different kind of border between our two countries. So this is, of course, an issue that is relevant to us as well. Let's go on to the next slide because there are a few others. Okay, I guess that was the last one, or something happened to the slide. In any case, I want to thank you for the opportunity. I feel that, you know, serving in the IDF at first, in my first career, and then continuing in AJC is really an opportunity to not just to work. This is really a mission. It's a mission for me. It's my mission for my entire team. We are based in Jerusalem, and I'm glad to be able to speak to you today. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. Thank you for the opportunity.
And thank you, Avital, for sharing with us. By the way, I get the AJC. I think it's like I don't know if it's daily or weekly, but sometimes it's spontaneous. You can join the newsletter and be updated every week about what the AJC is doing and what they're talking about and what's going on in the world with anti-Semitism, of course, with the other programs that you mentioned as well. I have to take a breath because on the one hand, I just heard three amazing professional women talk about the legacy of leadership. And on the news, I'm hearing the rise in anti-Semitism and the rise in violent anti-Semitism, what's happening on our campuses, for example, in the United States, where I grew up. And I'm trying to find the balance.
Let me help you with something optimistic.
Okay.
Because October 7th did not only lead to increase in anti-Semitism, it did something else. And during my visits across the US, I heard this over and over again. And this is the positive issue. You know that in America, there are millions of Jews who are unaffiliated. In other words, they don't belong to a Jewish community. They're not active in a Jewish framework, not in synagogue. Okay, fine, it's their choice. After October 7th, we saw across the board an increase of American Jews who wanted or sought urgently to be a part of the Jewish community. Now, for me, I don't care if it's a conservative one, a modern Orthodox, a Reform, everything is fine as long as they found a place to belong from the Jewish, angle they chose. And this is something positive that happened after October 7th. I saw it in Florida, in the East Coast. I saw it in the West Coast. I really saw it everywhere. More and more people joined synagogues. More and more people joined different YMCAs, those kind of
JCC.
JCCs, yes, all of those recreation and clubs. And I think that's a very positive sign. And also it tells us that in times of trouble, we know how to come together as a community. And we saw that also with the support of American Jews to Israel. Next week an AJC delegation will be landing here. It's the 4th solidarity mission that is coming here since October 7th. And we are not unique in that sense. So I think this is positive aspect that we can all be proud of.
Yeah, I mean, you can never have everybody on the same page thinking the same way, and you're always going to have that challenge. And we have that challenge in Israel as well. But yes, that is a very good thing to hear, because in the 1990s, when we were living in the States, one of the problems was that so many American Jews were leaving and were not affiliated and didn't want to be Jewish. So that was a big problem. They started all these partnerships around the world. So it actually does help that there's a sense of community. And I want to connect that to one of the questions that Lori got about doing this work. I might want to put two questions together. One person asked about the work you're doing and how you are able to balance the emotional side of studying the Holocaust and being able to prepare a presentation, which is something all Holocaust researchers have to deal with. But I also see a connection to the second question about how can you use the lessons and the legacy to actually, within Israel, which is a very interesting question, because I don't know how many people outside of Israel know about Sivia Lebenkin as opposed to inside, but I don't know. You're talking of thousands and thousands of people that you've exposed to her story. But I think the questions together are really one big question, right? First of all, balancing the emotional strength that you need in order to deal with this type of subject matter, and then utilizing it and using it to actually to have some sort of lesson that we can learn from, to learn from our past, to learn from female leaders. And with this specific note in Israel, which I thought was a very interesting point, how it can help us. So I know you already answered in the chat box, but if you'd like to give kind of a answer to all of us. And then I have one more question for Avital as well.
Yeah, so I think my answer in many ways dovetails with both what Avital was just speaking about and also Petra from the Austrian Parliament, in the sense that I think the key word and skill is really about community building. And when I do this work, like Zivia, I'm really working primarily with young people. A little older than she was, but the young people I'm working with, they're college students, 18 to 22. Sometimes I'm working with students who are from 5th grade to high school. That's really the target population, using the college students who I have the ability to really influence them, deepen their insights into the Holocaust, and then have them be role models for the younger students through their performances, through their teaching. And primarily, I think what's different about how I teach the Holocaust, I try to teach the students who are African American men by memorizing Zivia's testimony and then presenting it to Orthodox Jewish students who have no idea who Zivia is and don't have as deep an understanding of Kristallnacht and the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising as my non-Jewish students. So I try to really have the information flow, and it becomes like an emotional connection. It is very, very emotional. We just celebrated the 96th birthday of one of the Holocaust survivors. One of our survivors passed away 2 days before her 104th birthday. I mean, all of this is incredibly emotional work. And the students feel that. It motivates them. It motivates people of all ages. I think that's why the Holocaust can be such a powerful topic. But how are we using the power of those emotions? Are we using it just to remember, which is in itself important, or are we using it to motivate, to understand things that initially seem incomprehensible, like what human beings can do to one another, why there's misunderstandings based on faith, how we can be more open-minded. This is like, the day-to-day work of community building that Zivia Lebetkin and others were doing. Hadassah Rosensaft, this beautiful anecdote, when she got to Bergen-Belsen, she needed clothing to help these little children who were in her charge. The Holocaust hadn't ended yet, right? She was under the Nazi regime trying to help small children in Bergen-Belsen, and she went to get clothing for them, and there were 2 non-Jewish women who were in charge of the clothing. It turns out she had helped those 2 women when she was in Auschwitz as a doctor. And so they felt indebted to her. And so because she had done the right thing and behaved with kindness in Auschwitz, when she got to Bergen-Belsen, now she had 2 women who were not Jewish who were able to help her. And so those are it seems so simple. It's too simple. But there is a piece of it that is really simple about kindness and compassion. Though it does involve sometimes crossing boundaries that are uncomfortable. And then it gets harder as you get to more positions of power where we want to know, why is it that it's so hard for us to really appreciate the role of women in the Holocaust, as well as in the civil rights movement, and in overlapping movements like Josephine Baker, who's in both the civil rights movement and in World War II fighting the Nazis, and yet so many people don't know her words. How do we get people to know the words of these women in the past, and then to listen to women in the present and help elevate them to positions of power where they maybe are able to execute this kind of kindness and compassion in a different way than male leaders, and influence male leaders to similarly execute compassion and kindness and insight. So, whether we're talking about diplomats or whether we're talking about high school students, I think these are all skills that we need to train each other, train ourselves to be community builders. And I think that is one piece. I just also do want to mention that I think that the way that the Holocaust is taught at the Ghetto Fighters House is so inspiring in its connection between the Holocaust and pre-war Jewish life and Israel. I think the fact that most Holocaust centers have cut that connection is a source of problem for why there's not a true understanding of what Israel represented. There's so much empathy for Anne Frank, for Jews in Europe during the Holocaust, but there's not that recognition of what it meant to be Jewish. And I think that is a big work in progress that we all need to do.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer. I think that as far as Israeli society, I'm going to connect it to what Avital said. These community builders, diplomacy, communication, face-to-face, I think these are all very important elements. Also, like you said, I think you have to be active in your learning, and in order to be able to process and learn from, you also have to be able to pass it on. So I think many of these leadership examples that we have from the Holocaust, they have to be an inspiration to do it in your community as well. And I know that you're working at that level as well. Because we see a lot of communities, like the campus communities, that were torn and are still being torn apart. And it's a hard thing to see. And so I want to go to one last question, because it is very late here in Israel. I think it's also connected, because this question is, I got it in a private message, so I don't think everyone saw it. Are you familiar with Ido Aharoni's April 2024 article, Israel's Reputation is a National Security Matter? I see you're smiling. Here are 5 ways it can be improved. He argues that Israel's global reputation is critical to its national security, and suggests reframing Israel's identity by focusing on cultural, technological, and human achievements rather than political narratives or conflict. Given your perspective, how do you see this approach aligning with Israel's current strategic efforts to improve its international image? I don't know if we have a current strategy, but maybe the AJC does. So what do you think? Also, coming from your background from media, it'll be interesting.
Yeah, it's maybe I'll start with the fact that a few hours ago I was asked by BBC in Arabic to give an interview, a live interview about the current situation and the border with Lebanon. And yesterday I spoke with Sky News as the hostages were released, and the day before that I spoke to another network. So, when you hear the questions, only then you understand how severe the situation is really. And obviously an anchor is sitting in a studio, I don't know, in the UK, in London somewhere, or Doha, wherever. I don't expect them to have an academic background and a full understanding of the situation on the ground, but still there are some major issues that unfortunately Israel has failed to deal with. I don't like the word hasbara in Hebrew. It's a bad word. We use the word advocacy, which I connect to a lot better than hasbara. Hasbara means in Hebrew to explain. And when you're a kid and you did something wrong, you have something to explain, but doesn't mean necessarily everything Israel is doing is wrong. But I think that Israel lacks a mechanism which is sharp and quick and witty, and has top experts who can spread their wings all across the world, the globe, and reach major media outlets and just push themselves, push the story, the Israeli narrative, rather than just being reactive. Because unfortunately, we are reactive. We should be proactive. We should initiate. And I think we're lacking that, unfortunately. I try to help as well as I could. I can tell you that I did more than 60 interviews since the war began, and I speak to major media outlets in India and in Latin America and wherever I can. But it's an ongoing kind of challenge. And I think that social media is a huge challenge because at the end of the day, everybody who's holding a phone is a photographer, is a cameraman, is a reporter. Because let's say a bomb exploded outside my house now, and I'm going out with my phone. I take a picture, and of course, I write my own feelings or description as I see it. And of course, I have my own objective way, which I look at the situation as everybody else. So that is, I have a slide somewhere that shows what's happening in 1 minute all across the world in terms of the extent of the social media and the amount of information. You know that the person goes out to work in the morning, an average person is exposed to something like 3,000 visual media notices, whether it's billboard charts or pop-ups on your phone, or even something you saw on TV, something like 100 and, oh, you found this.
Thank you, Shai.
Good work. So this is
Wow.
the competition that Israel actually faces in its advocacy efforts every day. So it's an ongoing battle. The media front is really a battlefront. It should be addressed a lot better. And also don't forget that Jews are outnumbered in the sense that there are a lot of more anti-Israeli activity worldwide.
Yeah.
But I believe we should definitely take the proactive approach. Unfortunately, that is not always the case. There's a lot of improvement to do in that field, and I can just hope that we'll do better in the future.
Yes, I agree. I don't know what else to say, but I think you're absolutely right. And I think the question was very appropriate because we do have a lot of difficulty with that. And because on the one hand, you said that Jewish communities are growing and getting stronger. On the other hand, Jewish communities are now afraid to show their face and to show their identity when they're walking down the street. And it's just a crazy combination of getting strength in the community, but also being afraid to go out and feel.
Yeah, but not everything is negative because
No.
Sky, when I spoke at Sky News yesterday, it was just the hour when the girls came back. And it was 12 o'clock Israel time. So this was like a top of the hour kind of program. And for 45 minutes, Sky News, which is a big network, dealt only with the hostage. It was a Saturday, as if this is the only thing. So I felt that in a way, the whole world stopped its breath with us because it was an emotional human gesture. Because, everybody had emotions when they saw those girls wave on the stage terror theater of Hamas in the Palestine square in Gaza. So it was true emotion. Doesn't matter if you're Jewish or not. It doesn't matter if you are from Botswana or from the UK. But then I heard today that the Prime Minister of Ireland compared in his speech the Holocaust with Israel's activities in Gaza. And then I woke up again to the harsh reality. So what I just want to say, it's an ongoing battle. I don't think that we should be gloomy about it. We just need to face the reality. We need to educate a lot everywhere. Even all of you here, which took the time and joined us today, it's even talking to your coworkers, to your families, to your neighbors. A lot of people just don't have the information. This is what I find out because when someone attacks me, and I was attacked many times, someone attacks me with a statement, with a slogan, I actually stop and ask the question, what does that mean for him? And often I found out that it's all about ignorance, just plain ignorance. And when you face the person with the facts, then usually he has nothing to say. He or she have nothing to say.
Thank you to everyone. So again, I want to thank all our speakers today. I'm okay, right? Okay, Lori Weintrob and Petra Bayr, and of course, Avital Leibovich, and again, also to our partners, the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung in Israel, and a partner every year. And this year, we also are very honored to have the Holocaust Center at Wagner College, and to have the Remember the Women Institute with Rochelle Seidel. So thank you again, everyone, for a very interesting and important discussion. And again, Judith, thank you so much for bringing this idea to the front. And it worked. I think that it really was a very timely discussion and very important. So thank you again to everyone. And as always, shalom to all. And we'll see you in upcoming programs.